Good morning. My name is Johanna Manrique. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia. And today we are going to see my presentation about housing and settlement experiences of Colombian immigrants in the Toronto CMA. And this is the presentation roadmap. First, the context about the housing crisis and the Colombian immigration. Secondly, research design. Third, methodology. Fourth, theoretical framework. Fifth, results. Sixth, policy implications. And finally, the summary and contributions. So let's start with a little bit of context. Firstly, we have the Toronto housing crisis. We have about 437,000 new permanent residents admitted to Canada in 2022. That is the result of the post-COVID increase that impulsed the new arrivals per year to about 300,000 people. And the thing is that Toronto absorbed great share of this new population. The rental market increased so much that is one of the most expensive cities in the world and in Canada. And most of the people were spending more than the 30% of their income on housing, on rental housing. Now let's see what happened with Colombian people. The population increased in 2022 by 105% and is the second largest Latin American group. As Colombian immigrants represents the 15% of the share of the Latin American group and is second behind the Mexican group, it's very interesting to look a little bit about this population. So let's look at the objectives. The general one is to examine the housing and settlement experiences of Colombian immigrants in the Toronto CMA. And the specific ones to look at the socio-demographic characteristics, the significant housing and settlement barriers, the coping strategies, the role of local organizations, and some policy recommendations. And how did I do this research? It's a mixed method approach. Basically, I made a quantitative survey with 200 Colombian people and then some semi-structured interviews with key informants. So the first one, it was made in the city of Toronto and the suburbs of Toronto, 100 in each part. And I used Qualtrics for the digital survey and a snowball technique. And also, I visited some settlement organizations, community centers, churches, just to talk to different settlement organizations and to see how Colombian people are using these resources. My theoretical anchor is the Murdy and Teixeira model. The framework links 5 interdependent components: neighboring, housing, education, employment, and income. These are mutually reinforcing conditions. For instance, the level of income and the stability of employment determines the housing conditions. Also, the education has implication on the level of income and the employment. It determines whether if they are going to get an adequate or a suitable or an affordable housing and in what kind of neighborhood they are going to live. But for the particular case of Colombians, I include 2 new components: the entrepreneurship in the category of income and formal organizations that are quite important for Colombians to be able to settle in the city. So let me describe exactly who responded this surveys. This sample of 200 Colombians are representing the responses of 54.5% of female respondents, 70% of Colombians that are already permanent residents against a 30% that are citizens, 63% who arrive with a spouse or partner, 46% are from Bogota, the capital city, 62 people live in the city of Toronto, and 57 in the suburbs. 73% hold at least an undergraduate degree, and 68.9% are currently working with a paid job. And here let me quote a little bit of what one of the respondents said. We had the idea of being able to live better or at least as well as we did in our country, but the cost of renting a home far exceeded our budget. And why Canada? Why Toronto? What were the main motivations? So let's see that the reasons for choosing Canada are more related to security and safety. It is the first one with 30%, followed by job opportunities, 23%, education, 18%, better quality of life, 14%, professional growth, 7%, and then family reunification, about 6%. And then why choosing Toronto? So the first one is the employment opportunities, about 27%, safety, 17%, education opportunities, 15%, family and social networks, 12%, city features, 11%, and transport and access, 9%. So, security drives the motivation for coming to Canada, but employment opportunities to settle in Toronto. So, what kind of barriers Colombian immigrants encounter upon arrival? The 29.4% of respondents, they say that the financial constraints and the credit score is one of the most important barriers. So, with no Canadian credit history, banks are reluctant to lend. Landlords demand high deposits and financial proofs that they don't have. In the 35% of the cases, the cost of housing is one of the most important barriers. And also there are some landlord requirements difficult to meet, like high salary requirements. Also, the 59.6% of respondents say that they spend more than the 50% of their income in rental processes. It's also high competitive and there are discrimination. And in the 10.6% of the cases, there are also legal barriers. About employment and income, Colombian respondents say that they have an employment mismatch and a financial fragility. Among the employment challenges, the most important is the lack of Canadian work experience, is about the 26%. English language proficiency constraints, 17%. Lack of professional networking, 15%. And then work experience not recognized in Canada, 14%. Skill mismatch for Canadian labor market, 10%, and educational credentials not recognized in Canada, 9%. Regarding the income, the 20% of respondents say that they earn less than 10,000. Also that they have low saving capacity and that the entrepreneurship is the only way they can cope with some expenses that they have they can cover. So, given those structural conditions, how do they manage? The dominant strategy is actually the social support with co-ethnic people. It could be another Colombians, Latin American people, or Spanish-speaking connections. Also, in the 10.8% of the cases, they find professional assistance for real estate or for accommodation or settlement, legal advisors. 30.8% are financial planning. That includes also pooling services or sharing accommodation. The 10.8% of them adapts and compromise, accepting smaller or lower quality or shared housing. The 9.2% do some research. And then the 1.5% of them uses some settlement services. So in terms of the institutional ecosystem, what they provide and what's missing. So settlement organizations in the Toronto CMA provide in principle a comprehensive suite of services: counseling, housing assistance, employment support, legal aid, language training, health referrals, cultural programming, and emergency assistance. The problem is on the access side, because language training to LINC or EGLAX, for instance, is restricted by immigration status in ways that they create gaps. So they are just doing it for work permit holders or for people that is already a PR. That is the same for employment services. So there are no Colombian specific settlement or cultural services. They are just in the framework of the Pan-Hispanic or the Latin American services. So let's talk about the policy recommendations. Let's start with the federal level. Maybe a language training eligibility should go beyond the PR status. Also, there should be a streamlined foreign credential recognition pathways. That could be great. Also, in terms of civil society, to promote landlord-tenant mediation services, increase awareness of tenant rights among newcomers, support Hispanic, Latino-specific settlement organizations. That could help a lot. Also, at the provincial and municipal level, to regulate discriminatory rental screening practices, expand anti-discrimination enforcement in rental market, and improve inner city transport connectivity to suburban employment. At the consular diplomatic level, maybe a pre-departure housing orientation programs in Colombia could be great, and also bilateral framework for credential validation before migration. Finally, thank you so much for listening to this presentation. If you would like to reach me out, you have the contact details here, or you can scan the QR code. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.